Hello and welcome to ranking the Final Fantasy XIV dungeons. There's a lot of them, 72 to be specific, but I'm going to give each one their due, as we normally do in this series. And how do I rank a dungeon? How do you take a dungeon and say this is a triple S tier dungeon or this is a no dungeon? I'm going to rank the dungeons personally based on difficulty, based on mechanics, based on the design of the dungeon, based on the enemies that you fight in the dungeon, based on the pulls that are in the dungeon, and I'll get more into that in specific dungeons for anybody that just likes to watch me rank things and has not played 14 themselves, and based on the thematics of the dungeon, basically. So, I'm not going to be ranking it on the song in particular, although the song may play a part, because I do want to do a separate video just of the dungeon themes, but for the most part, it will be ranked on what the dungeon is doing, what it's throwing at you, and what it looks like.
For the most part is defined as with respect to the greatest part.
Alexa just always has to jump in. Always. All right, so let's start at the beginning. We start off with Sastasha. Now, Sastasha, your basic dungeon, right? It's the first dungeon that we get in the game. Has very basic mob structure. Have a couple small pulls and then some big pulls. A pull, of course, being the amount of enemies that you have in any one encounter, and you can combine pulls depending on how good your tank and how good your healers are, but your basic pulls are going to be mobs of roughly 3 enemies or more, sometimes less depending, and every once in a while you'll get some more elite mobs that are on their own, and sometimes you'll mix those with other pulls. It just depends on, again, the skill of the tank and of the healer. But Sastasha has some pretty basic pulls to it. It's not anything real complicated. However, what Sastasha does have that I think is really cool, and again, it is the first dungeon in the game, but it has a puzzle mechanic where you can find a small strip of paper, and you can get the color from it and solve the puzzle. A lot of the other dungeons on this list do not have that. I will say I have run Sastasha so many times now that the dungeon gets really old to me. I'm not going to dock it points for that, because it's not Sastasha's fault that I always seem to get it in leveling roulette when leveling up to like a level 40 roughly, and sometimes even at level 74. But I do think Sastasha is a really interesting dungeon. It's got a lot of extra paths that aren't on the main path that I think is really cool, and I think they do a really good job of having the world building be in this dungeon as well. Like the hole, for instance, is really interesting. You also have a non-boss, like mini-boss style encounter almost, where you open a door and have to kill the Seeker so that Seeker Reaver or something like that, so that he drops the key that you need to be able to go do your next boss fight. The only real negative that I have for Sastasha, is how many times you fight the captain. It's 2 times you fight the captain, and the third time you would have fought the captain were it not for a different boss, which, sure, that works, but it would have been nice to have a couple other bosses instead of just fighting the captain both times. I do think it's pretty funny when he runs away, right? And other people comment on that in the world. But for the most part, kind of disappointing fighting him so many times. But I think it's a really solid dungeon. I'm actually going to put it in... I'm thinking about putting it in S, honestly. Because when you really look at it, yes, it's a dungeon that I'm super tired of running. But it's a dungeon that's very different from some of the other ones on this list. We're going to put it in S for now. It could move, it could fluctuate, but we're going to put it in S for now. Following Sastasha is Tamtara Deepcroft, which is a dungeon that I cannot stand. I think it has a really cool mechanic in the form of the orbs that you have to get, the cultist orbs, and that, allows you to open up that shield so that you can go and fight the Mind Flayer boss. And that boss can be stunned, which is very nice. But I just think the dungeon's kind of a slog. It feels a lot longer than it is because you're on a straightforward path almost the entire time. There are a couple of offshoot rooms, but nowhere near like the big spread out middle section of Sastasha. It's just, in a lot of ways, I think Tamtara is evident of what a lot of the dungeons in this game are, which is you start at the start and go to the end. And you're going to miss a lot of those side paths most of the time because there's no real reason to go down them. And I think that's okay. That's not a bad thing, right? But it can get tiring. And it's not Tamtara's fault that a bunch of other dungeons followed its pattern. But it's not a pattern that I think is necessarily great, especially compared to what some of the other dungeons do. I think thematically, Tamtara get stale really quickly, whereas Sastasha, you're moving from, it's the start of the cave, there's water beside us, to now we're in a pirate's base, to we're going off on these side caverns, to now there's this cage with all these dogs in it, to, hey, here's a pier. In Tamtara, it's move through these tunnels. And as you move through these tunnels, you may get to see some more open holes, basically, into a world below that you don't get to go to right now. But it's only really that for sights to see. Pull-wise, I think it's pretty decent. There's a really rough pull towards the mid with a couple of the flies and the small bugs, and then a soldier that can heal. And then another soldier, depending on where you pull and how much you pull. That pull can be kind of annoying, but for the most part, I think it's fine. I just don't think it looks very good. I don't think it's very fun. And I just don't think it's a very cool dungeon. Which is unfortunate because it's the second dungeon you get. You go from Sastasha, which is not perfect, but thematically is really cool, to Tamtara, which should be thematically really cool because, like, the cultist thing going on, and just doesn't really feel like it is. So I think we're gonna put Tamtara down at a C. And I know that's a huge drop, but we got a lot more dungeons to cover here. Copperbell Mines, I think, is interesting because coming off of Tamtara, Copperbell should be really annoying, right? Because it's just more tunnels. But the difference is that Copperbell is built around this idea of it is a mine, right? So you get into the mine and you have these Spriggans running around, and they're decent fights on their own, right? But then you also have the bigger guys with their pickaxes, the Gygasses, that are breaking through walls and attacking you, and I think that's really cool. I think that going into that underground section at the bottom of the mine with all the water and the different mob types down there is really cool. My problem, and I didn't even really talk about the bosses in Copperbell, or in Tamtara, my problem with Copperbell Mines are the bosses. Because the first boss that you fight is Kotos. But Kotos starts as a mob of Spriggans. And you kill all the Spriggans, and then you kill more Spriggans, and then you kill more Spriggans. And then finally a Flambeau drops down, and you kill the Flambeau, and then you kill more Spriggans, and then finally Kotos drops down, and you burn him down instantly, and the boss fight's over. It could have just been the Spriggans, and could have been a really cool encounter about having to try and balance a bunch of different enemies coming from different places. But the Spriggans themselves, because they're not the boss, die really quickly. So they're just kind of there. And it is cool the first time, because you're running everywhere trying to figure out what's going on. But because they don't have much health at all, the second time you're in there, there's no reason to panic at all. You're just gonna, stand in one spot and kill them as they come to you. The second boss is a really interesting idea as well, with the slimes that you have to use the bomb to blow them up and get them smaller so you can actually hurt them. I have found with randoms that unless they will actually listen when you type in chat, it is incredibly difficult sometimes to get them to pay attention to the fact that the bomb needs to stay alive. But I do think that's a really interesting fight. I don't think it would bother me so much if not for the Kotos fight. And then the final fight is cool. It's thematically appropriate. The giant Gigas is just going over there and breaking the wall to release his servants, and his servants are going to release more of them. And if you don't burn them down fast enough, then, you lose. And I think it's a really cool idea. I just think that first Kotos fight really drags it down, so we're going to put it in a B tier. For Tamtara's, the big bosses are these demons. I didn't bring them up. You fight 2 of them in the dungeon. Actually, you fight 3 of them in the dungeon, and they're okay. They're not very interesting fights, to be honest. Although it can be really fun if you're running blue mages to zip them back and forth. That's really cool. Following that is Halatali. Halatali has some really cool mechanics with these chain winches. 5 of them that you have to find. I wish it was a little bit more random what you get, because you can either get 3 Thunder Sprites, you can get 1 bomb, or you can get a chest. And it is random which one you're going to get, but I feel like I see the 3 sprites so much more often than I see everything else. And maybe that's just my bad luck. But it would be cool to see the chest or the bombs pop up more often. And it is really funny when you hit that bomb and somebody that's never run Halatali before thinks they need to kill the bomb, and the bomb, of course, immediately explodes when you let out of the winch. So it can be pretty interesting there. I think that Halatali has some really weird pulls. The bombs that float around just outside are able to join in on any pulls if you get too close to them. But other than that, the pulls are really good for the most part. I think the Doctors are fun fights. The bosses are okay. I think that Fire Main is an interesting idea, right? Burn down the boss while keeping the ads from getting to the big furnace in the middle of the bonfire, I suppose, because it does raid-wide damage. It just hasn't been scaled at all, so even remotely well-geared parties, even with level sync, are just not going to have to bother with it at all, which is fine, right? It's interesting enough for an idea. The Thunderclap, the Drake is terrible. I really hate that kind of fight where bosses just get invulnerable for a little while and you have to deal with another mechanic. I know there are people that love that mechanic, so, hey, more power to you. But I cannot stand it when you're doing some good damage, you feel like you're getting progression, and then, okay, it's time for the boss to go be invulnerable again for a little while. Deal with these thunder sprites while you wait for him to come back out of the water. And like it does the job, right? But it's just not great to me. I do like that there's an optional boss in the pit paste. I think that's really cool that you can run into him if you go to grab that treasure and he just spooks you. I think that's really nifty. That's a really cool idea that I wish would come back more. Optional bosses that are hidden behind secrets. And then Tangata, man. Tangata also becomes invulnerable during the fight, and all you can do is kill the little sprites, which is what you were doing in Fire Main if you weren't just burning down Fire Main. I think he's fine. Again, I really hate invulnerable phases. I think it's okay in boss fights when they're doing something else. But, like, Tanagata just kind of stands there while he's invulnerable. Same with Thunderclap, and it's just like, man, I really would have preferred if it had been something different. But thematically, I think it works in a lot of ways. I just wish that it was a little bit better. So we're going to put it in B. I think it does its job. And I do give it a lot of points, personally, for that moment where you go to get that treasure chest, and all of a sudden, here's another boss. I think that's really cool. After that is the Thousand Maws of Toto Rock. I'm gonna be honest with you, this is going into no, and I'll explain why, but no is a category in this situation that's saved for you load into a dungeon and you wish you had just logged out of the game instead of loading up your roulettes and getting Toto Rock. And the reason why is that Toto Rock has some of, like, they're not terrible boss fights, but it's a repeated boss fight again, just like Sastasha. And then it has this slowdown mechanic. It's also kind of a maze, which is cool because you could take two different paths and still complete the dungeon, which is really interesting. But the entire back half of the dungeon is covered in this green slime that makes you have the lead effect, so you move a lot slower in there. And it's also covered in these bombs, basically, these landmines that when you set them off, you get poisoned. And the poison doesn't even do that much damage to you anymore, so now it's just kind of an annoyance. And you're moving really slowly, and you just want to get to Graphius so you can kill him. It's a no for me. I think that it's a fine idea on paper to have that green goo, but I absolutely think it should have been spread out more and not just the entire back half of the dungeon. There are entire hallways that you just have to walk down it, and you just can't get away from it, which is a huge shame to me. Following that is Hawk Manor. Hawk Manor is an amazing dungeon for a couple reasons. First off, the themes. The thematic appeal of Hawk Manor. The place is beautiful. It's a haunted house, right? There's a ton of cool things going on. Some really interesting pulls that depend on how you want to do them. The maidens that are flying around, if you trigger them, then you can stun them out of the AoE they're immediately going to do after getting aggroed. You have, I think they're called, there's a name for them, handmaidens or something like that. But you have some really interesting boss fights. The first one being a elite version of those handmaidens that lets you get used to the fact that this dungeon is based on magical damage more than the previous ones really have been. That they're going to be using a lot of AoEs and things like that. I think Hawk Manor is like the perfect beginner dungeon in that it's really cool to have to run again because it's thematically cool, right? It looks really cool. It has good music. So, like, even if you have to run it again, it's whatever. but at the same time, it's a good learning dungeon for newcomers. And it also has a ton of side paths, which is really interesting. They don't all go anywhere, and some of them are locked doors that you have to get the keys to. But it's interesting if you fully explore it in that way. I do think it can be really confusing for people when you get down to the bottom of the dungeon and you've gone through all of the cells down there and you fought the second boss, the Jester and the Steward, and then you have to return, because I think most people would probably just try and run back. But I do think it's a really interesting idea to say, well, let's have the player return to the start of this dungeon using the return command that surely they know how to use by this point. I also think that second boss fight's really good against the Jester and the Steward, as they cover for each other. It requires not just the tank to be using a stun, but the DPS to also be using a stun if you want to effectively stun them both, because they're going to overlap their AoEs. It's going to have situations where maybe the tank and the DPS have not been paying attention to each other, and the tank's holding aggro just fine on one of them, but the DPS has aggro on the other. Well, maybe, they need to adjust. The tank needs to grab the other one. The DPS needs to start attacking the one the tank is attacking. I think it is a perfect beginner dungeon for that reason. The final boss fight is a bit annoying because of the lanterns, and that you can get stunned out of the lanterns while trying to douse them. But for the most part, I think this dungeon's really good. I think Lady Amandine is a really interesting battle as well. I do wish she didn't summon quite as many ads, but still a really fun dungeon. I'm going to go ahead and make Hawk Manor our very first Triple S dungeon, because I think it succeeds in everything Sastasha was trying to do, and it also teaches new players new mechanics, which they need to know. And it's still fun for returning players that have been playing the game for a while. Following up Hawk Manor, however, is Bray Flux. And you may be sitting here going, how do you remember all these names? I'm going to be honest with you. You're seeing me look to the left. You know what I'm doing. I have a list of all the names up, not just for the dungeons, but for the bosses as well. So that I'm not just going, oh, what's that boss called again? I'm trying to be reasonable here, everybody. Trying to make this a better video than just throwing it together. Bray Flux's long stop is a weird one. I think that it is an interesting dungeon, and I think the idea of saving the other goblins is really cool. You got to get there first so you can save them. You have to, kill the stuff that's attacking them. I think it's really interesting. I think it's kind of cool how it drags you to different places on the map. Like, to go through the first door, you have to go left instead of just forward. I think that's pretty interesting. However, Bray Flux loses all of its appeal for me in the second area, the area after the first boss. After the second boss, after the Inferno Drake. Because the area after the Pelican is pretty cool, with the goblins you have to save, and all of the different little paths that have chests on them and stuff like that. But the area after the Drake is really annoying. There's so much to do there. There's so many mobs, and they're all spread out, but if you're not careful, you're going to aggro all of them, and then you're going to get completely destroyed. I do think this is one of the first situations where you're going to encounter vision cone AoEs that you have to be looking away from, and also not in the AoE, so that's cool. You also have a lot of the bigger bias that are doing their big belly flop attacks, which is really interesting. You have to figure out how to get around those. But there's just so many mobs in that middle area, and so much of a chance of just a wipe, because you got overwhelmed, because somebody was in the wrong place, and when those mobs were going through their tracking, they caught you, and they come up on you. I think that the optional Quirrell is a really cool fight, and that you can pull him aside, you go down that side path, and you fight him, and you get a treasure chest for it. That is almost always guaranteed to have some good gear. There's one of the first eye patches that I used in the game was there for Sigurd. But I do think that middle section is really bad. I think the fight with Hellbender is pretty interesting. The fact that it can trap people into bubbles is pretty cool, and that you have to get them out of those bubbles. But you kill him, and then another boss drops in, and that's Ayatar, and you do some damage to Ayatar, and then he flies away, and the damage you did to him doesn't stick, which is kind of annoying. Would be really nice if the damage you did to him there stuck. Thematically, it makes sense because, he heals in poison pools, which I think is a really cool mechanic for his fight. He's spitting out poison pools, and if you don't move him out of them, he's healing in them. But at the same time, I don't really like that fight. He spits out so much poison that you're constantly having to move the boss, which can be really difficult on physical DPS, especially when you have to have him in a place where they can't get behind him to be able to get flanking or to be able to get back bonuses because the poison pools are in the way and there's just nowhere else to move him because the arena's not that big. So I do think this dungeon is a misstep. Gonna be honest, I think it has a lot of cool ideas, but I just don't think it really delivers on those ideas very well, unfortunately. Mainly because of that middle area. There are other dungeons that do that design better, and I definitely want to call those out when we get there. But Bray Flux, it's not terrible. It's not a dungeon. It's definitely not no, but I am gonna put it in C tier because of that middle area. Following Bray Flux is Karn. Man, Karn is a weird dungeon, because I think, idea-wise, it's really cool. You have to gather these relics to be able to open these doors. You have to make sure that these specific enemies die on these pressure plates so that the doors open. You have a doom mechanic on the Terratar that I think is really interesting, because you have to make sure that you're on the pad to clear off the doom for you. Otherwise, you straight up die. And this is the first time, really, that you're going to see doom in dungeons. You might, depending on what mobs you find in the world, you might have already seen it. But most likely, this is the first time you see it, is in this dungeon. And I think it's used really well here. I think the Temple Guardian is a pretty interesting fight. I think it's not terrible. It's not great, but it's pretty interesting. And of course, the Adjudicator is weird. It can summon these, like, boxes that people get stuck in until they destroy the rod so that they can get free. It has switches in the boss fight itself that are really interesting. I think, all told, this is a really cool dungeon. So why did I address it the way that I did at the start of it? Because of a specific enemy type inside this dungeon. And that's the Wespes. They're bees, or wasps, basically, and they have an ability called Final Sting. There are bees in the dungeon as well. It's Wespes and bees, depending on your fights. But Final Sting kills you, basically. It does almost all of your health and damage. It's so potent. I think it's like 90% of your maximum HP, which means if you're not like at top, if you're not topped off, you're dead. And if DPS don't focus them, you're going to die. And more often than not, I find DPS do not focus them at all. Which is a huge bummer, because it means that the tanks die all the time. So if you're a DPS and you're watching this, please kill the bees first, kill the wasps. They have to die first, please. Other than that, though, I mean, it can be really annoying when nobody knows the solution to the puzzle, or people have forgotten the solution to the puzzle and they keep summoning ads. But you can also open up that mystery hidden wall to get some chests that way too. I think Karn is really cool. I just really hate those bees, man. We're gonna put it in A tier, I think. Cutter's Cry! I'm gonna be honest with you, I hate Cutter's Cry. I think Cutter's Cry, I mentioned just a second ago with the Bray Flux about big open areas with a lot of enemies. Cutters does that. Cutters does that really well. It does it very, very well. Where there's a lot of different mobs, a lot of different pulls that you could do, or you could pull them all at once, or you could go straight for the exit. And I love that it gives you that option. Cutters has some nifty mechanics in the form of, you know, hey, here's the first boss. She's really tough. She's going to summon guards, and while they're out, she takes less damage. Kill them. Keep them away from her. You know, it's really cool. But it has the Chimera. And I hate fighting the Chimera so much. Not to mention the fact that Cutters is a huge maze and you can get lost in it very easily. The final fight with the Chimera is... It's not a badly designed fight. I just think that it has one major problem, which is that they will warn you that it's using either Dragon's voice or Ram's voice, and then almost immediately afterwards it does it. So if you have a low ping, if you don't have a good enough reaction time, you're going to get hit almost every time. And that means that so often while doing that, you will be almost to victory, and then your healer will die, or your tank will die, or your DPS will die, and well, time to redo the fight. And it's just, hey, don't worry about it. It happens. You're good. Let's do it. Because Ram's Keeper is that AoE of ice. Very difficult to avoid, even if you start moving right away. If you don't move right as you start to notice it casting. If you have a lag second and you wait and then begin to move, you're going to get hit. And then the Dragon's Voice is the cacophony, which homes in on you and you have to run away from the party. It's just really difficult trying to keep it all straight, especially because violet and blue are the two Qs that it uses. And they're not opposing colors at all, really. If it was red and blue, it might be easier. But violet means get in and as close to the boss as you can. Blue means get out and as far away from the boss as you can. And if you're running from a cacophony, when it says violet and you have to run in, then you're bringing the cacophony with you. It's just a lot, man. And I think if it wasn't for how much damage those attacks can do to you, they can really hurt. Plus, the violet with the Dragon's Voice, the electric one, can stun you as well, which makes it very difficult to get away from other stuff. And can interrupt actions, especially with the healer trying to heal. It's just a really difficult fight, especially for new players, and it leads to a lot of wipes. The second boss, the worm, is not that tough. It has some interesting mechanics. I really like the big sand pit that it can do, the quicksand move. But Cutter's Cry, for sure, for me, is a no. As cool as I think the dungeon is, just because of the Chimera. Man, I cannot tell you how many times I've wiped on that Chimera because we almost had it down, and the healer died, and the Chimera does pretty decent damage, so then the tank dies, and then it's, okay, let's do the fight again. After Cutters, I just realized how far we've gotten. We're almost 30 minutes into the video, and we haven't even done 10 dungeons yet. Okay, Stone Vigil I think is a pretty interesting dungeon. I really like the bosses in Stone Vigil. I think they're really interesting. I don't think they're perfect, but I think they're really cool. I like Stone Vigil regular way more than I like Stone Vigil hard, just to clarify. I think that Stone Vigil's just a really interesting dungeon because thematically it's cool, right? It's the ruins of an old Dravanian base, or a Kurthan base that the Dravanians have overrun. And it has some really interesting fights. It has some difficult pulls. The Avises can be really difficult if you're not ready for them. But for the most part, I think it's a really fun dungeon when it comes to just regular pulls. And the bosses are pretty good too. Chudo Yudo is a pretty interesting fight. I think that, the way that he will just suddenly shift at Lion's Breath or Swinge is really cool. And you have to be ready for that. You're going to want to have Rampart ready for when you see him about to cast Rake or about to cast Swinge, and you need to get out of the way of it, which is really interesting. I think Crochet is pretty cool, where you have to use the cannons to shoot down Isgabind, but Crochet itself is still a challenge, And then Isgabind itself is a really cool fight, as she's, breathing ice down upon the arena. It can be a tough fight, but unlike the Chimera, you don't have to worry about stuns or things like that, and you don't have to worry about trying to keep up with Blue and Violet, so you can focus mainly on just fighting the boss and avoiding its AoEs and trying not to stand in the Frostbite debuff areas that it leaves on the ground. I think Stone Vigil's a pretty good dungeon, all told. I think that there could be some more other paths to go down. It's kind of just that straight run. But for the most part, I think it's really solid. We're going to put it in A. Following Stone Vigil, though, we get one of my least favorite dungeons in the entire game, which is Zamile Darkhold. Why do I dislike Zamile Darkhold? What's wrong with Zamile Darkhold, Trey? I think, man, Zamile has one of the worst pulls in the game, in my opinion, which is that second pull. It's the second, after the first boss. That whole section is terrible. I hate it. The first boss, getting to him, having to stop and sit in the cooldown timers is a cool idea, right? Especially since some of them are set up where you're gonna get hit by AoEs from these crystals. But there are so many mobs, and a lot of tanks don't realize that if they stand in the light of the crystals, the purple ones, then they'll take less damage. And so you just want them to move a little bit over to the right and get in that crystal's light so that they get less damage taken, but they just don't do it. And then you have the first boss, which, it's a cool idea, having to get him to areas where he can take damage in the light of the purple crystals to too often people will try and grab him out in the middle, and then he has no aggro table, and he will just go wild on your party. But I think it's a really cool idea. It's the section after the first boss that is terrible to me. That cliff face where you can get knocked off by the giant toads. You have a ton of mobs out there. There's not as many as in other places, but there are definitely quite a few on patrol, and if you're not careful, they will come up, and you will have to deal with them as well, right? Getting knocked off is basically a death sentence, and if you don't know where you're going, you're going to pull even more mobs trying to get to the right path. The whole time, you're going to have curses being thrown at you from the spirits that are sitting inside the AoEs of the fire aspected and earth aspected crystals, whichever one of the two it is. And it is just a constant fight on that cliff face, trying to keep your health up as you are getting destroyed. And sure, with a good healer, you can keep it up, but a new healer or a random healer, they may not be ready for the amount of damage that's thrown out on the top of that cliff face. And it's gonna hurt. I think the second boss is really cool, Tau Lord. It's basically a DDR fight, as you have to try and fight him while dodging a bunch of other AoEs, which is really cool. I like that idea a lot. And I think Batral is a pretty nifty idea. Destroying the crystals so that you can weaken him, so that you can actually hurt him again once he's tethered to one. The fact that he targets individual people, and then once you have all the crystals destroyed, he will throw down this pitch at his feet that you have to try and take out. I think it's a cool idea. I just really hate that second pull. So I'm going to put it in a C. It would normally go in a no, but I do think Zamile is a cool enough dungeon on its own. Aurum Vale, however, is going in no. Man, Aurum Vale is like... The first pull of Aurum Vale is the make it or break it for a tank. When you enter Aurum Vale, your tank pulls everything in that dungeon, and your healer just leaves, know that I understand where they are coming from. Because that first room is full of enemies, and I've seen so many tanks just run straight forward and pull everything. The first room alone is not the reason why it's in no, though, because I do actually really dislike this dungeon. The first room is covered in gold bile. It's all over the ground. You step in it, you take poison damage. Tons of mobs. You get to the first fight against the locksmith, and you have to deal with it burrows. So the burrows will dig into your heart, I think is what it's supposed to be. And it's lungs, I guess. And you have to use, because the gold lung debuff, you have to use the fruit scattered around the arena to get rid of your debuff. Most people recommend that you do it after getting 2 stacks. I've seen some people say go for 3. But I've also seen people that just died from it because they weren't paying attention. So that's a huge shame. You take him down and you move into the second part of the dungeon, which looks totally a little different. It's kind of cool. You know, you get into like a more of a cave style area. The next big pull in there is also a big pull. It's not quite as big as the first one, but I've seen so many tanks die there too. You get the coin counter fight, which is extremely difficult to get past when you have new players or people that aren't paying attention, as most people do when they get into sub-level 50 dungeons. Specifically because he has like 2 different types of the 100-ounce swing, and one of them will just auto-kill you, the other one is like a frontal cone. He has that laser, he can paralyze you with Glower. It's just, man, it's a really annoying fight, and yes, it's doable, but it's just, why do it when you don't have to, you know? You go from there right back into the gold bile all over the ground, and you get into the seedlings, and if you kill the seeds before they hatch, you get a little bit of XP, but if you let them hatch first and then kill the Morbol seedlings, you get like 15 times, it's not even exaggeration, the amount of XP from each of those, so always let them hatch if you're going to run Aurum Vale. But then you just get another Ochu boss, just like the first one. It's just or I guess it's a Morbol, but still, like, why? Why? It's the same fight, basically. It's just with a Morbol this time instead of an Ochu. And you still have Gold Bile, you still Gold Lung, I guess. You still need to, Burrs, I think is what it's called this time. You still need to use fruit to get rid of your burr stacks, anywhere between 2 and 4 on this fight. It's just really annoying. It's not a dungeon that I ever want to do again if I can help it. It's just a big no from me. Next up is Wanderer's Palace. Wander's Palace is a really cool dungeon thematically. I feel like I've kind of dropped off talking about the themes and the design of some of the more recent ones, but Wander's Palace is the first one that really grabs you again thematically, and it is a ruined city of the Tonberry, the Nemeans, that were turned into Tonberries by this curse, this disease, and have died basically. And the remnants are still there and have lost their mind, but they're still fighting. And the whole time you're in this dungeon, or at least the first chunk, and then again in the second chunk, you're being chased by a giant Tonberry. Thematically, it's super cool. It's also really creepy, and he can kill you if you're not careful. If you don't get far enough ahead of him, if he runs up while you're in the middle of a pull, he will knife you, and you will die. It's a really cool idea. I wish the boss fights kept up to that idea, because although I think the dungeon itself is really interesting, I think the boss fights are for the most part pretty boring. I think the Keeper of Halidom is just kind of there. It has some nifty ideas, especially like when it sneezes on people and gives them some debuffs. Specifically the debuff that reduces the amount of healing you can get. I think that's cool. I just don't think the fight itself is very interesting. The second fight, which is basically against a giant flan, is called the Bavarois. It's fine. It summons in some different Bavaroises of different color, but there's not really much that you have to worry about there. Each of them has a different ability, but they go down pretty quickly. And the Tonberry King is a really cool idea. Trying not to let him get too close to the ads or not to kill the ads around him so he doesn't get a stack of Rancor is really cool. I think it's a really nifty idea. I just don't think the fight itself is very interesting. The dungeon, however, I think is still super interesting. It does have some cool side paths. There are some cool secrets. So we're going to go ahead and put it in an S. We're going to move it down to an A because of the boss fights. If it had better boss fights, it would go in an S for sure. But we're going to go ahead and put it in the top of A for now because of that. Next up is Castrum Meridianum. So these next two dungeons, Castrum Meridianum and Praetorium, are the two dungeons that are in the MSQ roulette. They are the dungeons that I've probably done the most in trying to level every job to 70 for Stormblood reviews and then to 80 for the Shadowbringers reviews, and I'm not even done with that yet, so I'm going to run them a lot more. They're probably my two least favorite dungeons to run now for that reason, so I'm going to try and divorce myself from that as much as I can, simply because I do think that they have some cool ideas. I think the boss fights in these dungeons are pretty bad. Spectacle-wise, Praetorium boss fights are way better. Castrum fights are just kind of there. They're against enemies that, in the first boss fight anyway, it's just a Magitech. And then the second boss fight is just a Magitech Colossus with a bunch of ads. And thematically, that's cool, because like you're storming Castrum Meridianum, you're taking on their Magitech. But there's not any identity to those boss fights, which is really disappointing. The final boss fight makes up for that a little bit, because you're fighting Livia, both in her Magitech and out of her Magitech armor. But I actually think both of those fights are bad, too. I think the canon idea is really cool, but it winds up being really annoying with randoms, especially with new players, because they just don't know, and I'm not holding that against them, but it doesn't make it less annoying when you see them not defending the Magitech hand, or they're firing cannons randomly, and then Livia destroys a set of cannons, and then the fight takes twice as long. I don't really like fighting any of the bosses in Meridianum. And pair that up with the fact that the run-up is, again, kind of just a straight line, although you're going to take that line and go a little squiggly off, but then you're always going to come back and do that straight line again. And there's not really any fun pulls in there. Like, the cannons are cool, and you can drag enemies to the cannons, and the cannons take them out really quickly. But then there's a lot of just waiting on Sid to get places. And the final pulls are really annoying, because sometimes you have tanks that just run into the group of large Magitech Colossuses, and thankfully the cutscene normally takes care of those, but it can still be annoying. And most of the time, you have tanks fighting over aggro for either the mobs that are on the two platforms with the searchlights, or for the two Magitech Colossuses, and so the party's getting cleaved a lot because of that, and it's just really unfortunate. I think this dungeon could be a lot more fun, but it's going to go in a C tier for me. It's not a no, just because you do have to do them, right? Um, it's not something that I would ever leave out of because I know I'm gonna get good XP for it, but I don't like it. Praetorium, I like Praetorium more. I think it's cool. It's a cool idea, right? It's a really nifty idea. It's the final dungeon of the main scenario of A Realm Reborn, um, launch, 2.0. And I think it's a nifty dungeon. I just hate it. And that again is because every day, if you do your MSQ roulette to be able to get your XP, which is a huge chunk of XP, it's most of a level. So how can you say no, right? You're gonna either do Praetorium or you're gonna do Castrum. Praetorium is a guaranteed hour because of the cutscenes. And so, like, how could I recommend this dungeon to people for fun, right? But you have to do it. So at some point, you're gonna have to go through it anyway. I do think story-wise, it's a cool dungeon. I just hate a lot of the pulls in this dungeon. I think the idea of the first pull is fine, but you don't have to do the first pull. You can run past the first enemies and go straight through the elevator. The second pull you have to do because you have to get a key. So sure, that's fine. But from there, it's just like there's this long run where you're gonna drag a bunch of enemies behind you, and everybody's just gonna go through the teleporter, so it doesn't matter. And then one of the tanks is probably gonna die, so that everybody else can go through. The other tank is gonna grab the enemies in front of the door. You're gonna kill them, get the key, and fight the first boss, which is another Magitech Colossus. And that's going to be a returning trend here, because there's a lot of Magitech Colossuses in these dungeons. But you take down that one, get a cutscene, go through the next. You got to sneak around, and the sneaking around is really cool. But at this point, you don't really have to sneak around anymore because you outlevel everything so much, so you just kind of kill it all. And then you fight another Magitech Colossus, and then you get Maggie, and that's cool, right? Running around on Maggie, blowing stuff up, that's really cool. I think it's a really fun time the first maybe 100 times that you do it. But after that, it's just like, okay, here we go again. Firing the cannon, shooting the machine gun, blowing up the door, watching Maggie explode. Here we go. Then you fight Nero, and the Nero fight's over almost as soon as it starts. Nero has like a 8-minute cutscene, something close to it, 6 or 8 coming in, and then it's immediately followed by you meet Gaius. And that's like another 4-minute cutscene with him talking there, maybe 5. You beat Gaius immediately because you burn him down super quickly now. Then you go to another cutscene with Gaius getting into Omega or Ultima, and the Ultima cutscene is like another 6 minutes. And then you fight Ultima, and then you beat Ultima, and you have another cutscene, which is like another 4 minutes. And then you fight Ultima again, and you beat Ultima again, and then you have another cutscene, which is like another 6 minutes, and then you kill La Bray in less than a minute, and you finish the dungeon. And it's just like, it's boss fights that were interesting at eye level now are not interesting, because everybody outlevels them. And it's literally, you stand in Gaius's fire because you kill him faster that way. Because it does no damage to you. To the point where there's no point even doing mechanics in the Ultima fight either. And it's just a huge shame because these fights could be really interesting and they're just not. It's going to go in CT. Even though thematically I think it's really cool. We are now, oh boy, almost an hour, and we've finished the main scenario of, I'm gonna cut out some of the parts where I was thinking on what I wanted to say, but oof. Following that is Amdapor Keep, not the lost city of Amdapor. This is the Amdapor Keep. I think Amdapor Keep is a pretty interesting dungeon. It's not one that you have to do. It's an optional dungeon, right? But of the optional dungeons for 2.0, I think it's pretty interesting. It has the Demon Wall, the first time you fight a Demon Wall, and Demon Walls are cool enemies. You can, however, be dropped off the side. You can get knocked off, or you can fall off. And that can be kind of annoying, because you die down there. You also have the Psych Flare, which is a pretty cool fight. It summons a giant stone golem, which is really interesting. And I don't think the ads in this are too bad either. I think it's a pretty reasonable dungeon ad-wise. And then the final boss fight is actually really cool. I think it has some really nifty moves. The Anantaboga, I had to look up the name because there was no way I was remembering. It's a really unique enemy type that you don't see very often outside of, say, Crystal Tower raids. So I just think it was a really cool, interesting fight. Dungeon-wise, thematically, it's cool. You're going through, the ruins of the keep that the Antipori had. You're seeing the leftover remains of that. There's some really interesting mobs that you see throughout it. I don't know. It's a cool dungeon. It's not like super great because there's not a lot of side stuff to do. In fact, you can run down some of the other paths and there's nothing there really. I think one of them has a chest, but I think it's a fine dungeon. I'd put it in A tier. Following that is Pharaoh Sirius. Pharaoh Sirius is not that great, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of Pharaoh Sirius. I think thematically it's really cool. I think the boss fights are really great. I just don't like the first half of the dungeon leading up to it. I think the first half is really annoying as you deal with the leeches and the boots and the pugils. I never know how to pronounce that correctly. It's not a very interesting dungeon in the first half, and then the second half gets really cool, and especially the boss fights, like the zoo. You fight the zoo there. That's really cool, right? And it has these eggs that are there. You have the tyrant fights, pretty cool. It's not like the best, but it's not terrible either. It's a nifty idea. And then the siren is a really cool idea. The siren at the top of the lighthouse that you've climbed up to the top of to stop. That's a really cool idea. I don't like the mob pulls in Pharaoh Sirius very much at all. I like it more than I like Pharaoh Sirius hard. That's for sure. But I think we're going to put it in a B for its pulls. I still like it more than I like Temptara or Bray Flux. Following Pharaoh Sirius, we have the first of our hard mode dungeons. So, Copperbell Hard. Copperbell Hard is in a weird place in that I actually like Copperbell Hard more than I like regular Copperbell. But I think the bosses are more annoying. So, like, the first one is this, like, the mastermind, and the fire that he throws down is just annoying. It's not damaging enough really at this point to kill you per se, but if you don't kill the flambeau before it gets to the fire, that will kill you. It's an interesting idea. I just don't really like the fight. I think Gogma Golem helps. I think Gogma Golem is a pretty cool idea. The spring in on top of the golem, trying to get you with it. I always feel bad about killing Biggie. Like, I don't like it, but you have to. But I still don't like it. And I think that Oranos is fine. I think that's an interesting fight. I just don't think it's like one of the best fights ever, I think for the most part, it's an interesting dungeon. I definitely like it more than I like regular Copperbell, but thematically it's still not really doing much for me, and it's just not that interesting of a place, I guess, is the way I would put it. So we're going to put it above regular Copperbell. Following that is Hawk Hard, and Hawk Hard is really cool. Thematically, it's not quite as nifty as Hawk, because it's like Hawk Manor, but red now instead of purple. However, I do think the boss fights are really good. I really like that final fight against Halicarnassus. I think they kind of forgot that they had a boss named Halicarnassus that would be here for later fights, but don't worry about that. And I really like that Halicarnassus can summon a Mandate. That's really cool. Again, thematically, it's a nifty dungeon. I don't like it as much as I like regular Hawk. I think it's more of a straight line than regular Hawk is, but I think it's got some cool stuff going on. We're going to put it in S. Lost City of Amdapor. Okay, so the Lost City of Amdapor is actually, like, super sick. I think this dungeon is one of my favorite in the entire game. It has an interesting premise as you were going through the city of Amdapor that has been overrun by these spores, as it is, like, completely falling apart here. You have some really interesting boss fights. The Decaying Gourmand that is able to suck you in and trap somebody so they can't, like, help with the fight, and you have to break its teeth, basically, to free them. The Ariosh, which is a pretty interesting boss, in the form of an Amura, or Wamura. I always mix that up. I think that's a cool boss. It's not as cool as, like, the Gourmand, but the Scale Flakes are really interesting, and the boss will go after whoever has the most of those. which is really interesting as compared to, you know, hey, here's an aggro table. And then Diabolos is such a cool idea for a fight. That fight can be really annoying with randoms, but having the doors that have symbols above them, and you have to mark them so that when he does the big, you know, hey, here's the big wipe attack, you can go through it and you go under and come back out and you're okay. He also has some really interesting attacks in the form of like the gravity attacks. Ruinous Omen, that's the name of the attack. I was looking it up while I was talking. I just think it's a really cool fight thematically. I think that the dungeon itself is really cool thematically. And getting to the bottom of Amdapor, which is the city of white mages, right? And finding Diablos there and realizing that he might have had something to do with what happened to the city of the Amdapori. It's just a really cool dungeon. I'm gonna give it a triple S. Let me know in the comment section down below where you would have put it. To be honest with you, it's been so long since I ran Halatali hard that I had to look it up to make sure that I was remembering it correctly. It's not a dungeon that you see very often in roulettes, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's an optional dungeon, and people don't have to unlock it. So a lot of people probably don't, which is a shame, because it's a really interesting dungeon. It's a training exercise, and there are traps and some decent pulls in it, but the bosses are what's really interesting. So you'll fight Parakbon, which is this big hulking guy, and there's a mammoth in the fight, and you have to use the mammoth to be able to avoid an attack that would wipe everybody. You have the Catoblepus that has these 4 pillars that each have an orb on them, and you have to use the orbs to be able to make it target those instead of you. It has some interesting DPS checks, and it's just a cool fight all around. And then you have, like, the gauntlet at the end, which is these different people attacking you, as well as this archdemon that's really cool, because, again, the dungeon is a setup of a training exercise, and so you're taking on the best that they have, you know? And I just think it's really interesting. The chain effect that pops up in there, where somebody has to go grab the staff so that everybody can be freed, is really cool. I think it's a nifty idea, right? There's not a lot of places to go in this dungeon, but thematically I think it's really strong, so we're gonna put it in A. Brayflux Hard is crazy. There's explosions, there's goblin trucks, there's drills, there's stuff running around everywhere. It is chaos in a really cool way. And again, it's not a dungeon that pops up very often, but I think it's really interesting. I think it has some really cool boss fights against the various different gob machines. And I just think it's a really cool dungeon. I don't think it's as cool as, say, Hawk or Amdapor or some of the other options, but I do think it's a really interesting idea. And I think I'm going to put it in S. I know a lot of people don't like fighting that final gob machine because it has the big bomb that you have to burn down, but I just think it's a really cool idea for a dungeon to say, hey, what if we had this dungeon that was already centered on goblins and had the Illuminati goblins attack it? Why not? Following that is Hullbreaker Isle. And Hullbreaker Isle is another one of those cool dungeons that has a lot of traps in it. So we were just talking about Halatali Hard and the traps that it had in it. Hullbreaker has these traps laid out on the ground that you can step in. And bear traps, basically. And if you step in them, they will slow you, which is really cool. It does, of course, wear off, but I think that's a really interesting idea. You also have some really cool boss fights. Sasquatch is really interesting. Shijorm is really interesting. And then the Kraken is super cool. Having to take out its limbs while it's trying to throw you around and it shoots ink. It's a really cool boss fight. I do think that Hullbreaker, that second stretch, can go on for a little too long without any side pass. It's kind of just a straightforward run. But I think it's a really cool dungeon. I like getting it every time that I see it. And it's one of my favorites. I'll put it in S as well. And you may say, Trey, you're not spending as long as all of these. And I say, you're right, but look at how many more we have. Stone Vigil Hard. In some ways, I like Stone Vigil Hard more than I like regular Stone Vigil, which got put right here, just everybody forgets. An A tier. I think Stone Vigil is a really interesting dungeon, especially the hard mode version. The regular pulls are okay. They're not like the best pulls in the game. And I know a lot of people really hate Kukafera. because you have to get on the cannons and and it takes a while. It's not an easy fight. I have soloed this dungeon at 80 on Paladin. You can just barely take out Kukafera. It's not easy at all by yourself, but you can do it. It's an interesting idea for a fight, and I don't want to dock it too many points for the fact that it is annoying to fight because it's a cool idea. At the same time, it is really annoying to fight it over and over again, especially if you get this dungeon back to back. However, the other fights are really good. Gorianch fight and the Garuvaganas fight, mainly because it's just such an interesting idea to have bosses that don't have aggro table. And so, for instance, everybody has to be avoiding it. The tank cannot keep it cornered with the Garuvaganas. And then a second one will show up. And so then you're having to deal with both of them, and obviously you want to burn one down. But it's really cool to have bosses that aren't on the aggro table. I wouldn't want them all to be that way, clearly. That would be ridiculous and make tanks kind of worthless. But I think it's cool every once in a while to throw enemies at you that are off the table. And so the Garuvaganas fight is one of my favorite final boss fights in all of this game. I just think it's really cool. I just realized I've been talking about Stone Vigil hard, and we skipped Tamtara hard. We'll go ahead and rank Stone Vigil hard, and then we'll come back to Tamtara. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a really fun dungeon. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Some of the pulls are really annoying, especially the pulls right after Kukafera, where you have all of those Avises. But still not a terrible dungeon. I'm going to put it in high B. Tamtara hard. So, Tamtara, right here. Not a dungeon that I like at all. Top of C bracket right now. Probably going to move further down C. I love Tamtara hard. Tamtara hard thematically is super cool. It brings in everything with Edda and her storyline again and makes it the focus of the dungeon. It's got a very spooky feel to it. You're dealing with coffins. You're dealing with some really crazy mechanics. It's just a really, really thematically interesting dungeon with some cool boss fights. That final fight against Avir. Really, really cool. And again, thematically, it fits that story. It makes its story super tragic. Yeah, I really, really love Tamtara hard. It's triple S tier for sure. Snowcloak! So this is the 2.4 level 50 dungeon. Soon we'll be out of level 50 dungeons. Just a few more to go. Snowcloak is pretty cool. I don't hate it. It's not anywhere close to my favorite dungeon. I think the regular pulls in this dungeon are fine. Nothing too stand out that I can think of. There's a couple pulls with the wolves that can be a little annoying, but for the most part, everything was fine. I do hate the Yeti fight, however. I don't know what it is about the Yeti fight. I always forget how it works when I'm in the middle of it, and now I can look back on it and go, oh yeah, it's fine, snowballs. Work with the snowballs. But I hate that Yeti fight so much, because in the moment, I always forget how the snowballs work. The Wandale fight is fine. Not bad at all. And the Fenrir fight is really cool, actually. But I hate that Yeti fight. I think Snowcloak has a really good soundtrack to it that can get really annoying when you've run it a bunch of times. Because it's basically just the same notes back to back. But, yeah, we're going to put it in a low B, I believe. It'll probably move around. B tier will probably get shifted around a little. We're going to put it in a low B for... That's not fair, though, because thematically it looks really cool. We're going to put it in a low A. Thematically, it looks really cool. I remembered that the Fenrir boss room. That boss room looks really cool. Sastasha hard. So, Sastasha hard is like... I didn't know I needed to go underwater in Sastasha to see what was below the water. But now that I do know, every time I go back to regular Sastasha, I'm looking at the water going, I want to go back down there. I think the boss fights are decent. They're not great. Fighting the Kraken again as the final boss of another dungeon is not ideal, I would say. But I don't hate it, for sure. I think it's a really cool dungeon idea-wise. I just think actually running the dungeon isn't a lot of fun. but it's not terrible either. I actually really like the fight against Carlobos, the big crab creature that has like the tail screw attack. It's kind of the same fight that you're gonna do in Shishui, but I was trip over Shisui. But Carlobos is okay, and then Captain Madison's not bad. I think we'll probably give Sastasha Hard a low A as well. There's not a lot of dungeons in this game that I hate. It's really just these here. And then B tier are just ones that I don't like running. I don't hate them. After that's Karn Hard. I think I like Karn Hard more than I like regular Karn. And mostly because of the boss fights. I think the damaged adjudicator is really cool because you're fighting the old adjudicator again, but you're way stronger now. And he's already been broken up because you fought him the first time. But now he has new moves because now he's all broken up, so he has different alternatives to what he had before. I think that's a really cool idea, you know? The Sabotender Imperats is an interesting idea too. Don't know why there are Sabotenders here when there weren't in regular Karn, but hey, okay. I think it's a really interesting fight, and I do often forget the mechanics in it too, but unlike the Yeti, I don't think it's as interesting or as annoying as a fight as the Yeti is. So it's, you know, it's fine. And then the Vice region is super cool with the zombification curse that he can put on you. It can be really annoying to explain to people because of how quickly you can get zombified and mummified, I guess. But it is a really fun fight for the most part. I like it quite a bit. So, Karn Hard, I think we're going to put right above Karn Regular in A. And following that up is Keeper of the Lake. I am really torn on Keeper of the Lake. Because on the one hand, I think Keeper of the Lake has some really good boss fights. And on the other hand, Keeper of the Lake is really annoying to run with randoms. I think that it can be one of the more annoying dungeons to run with randoms. Because all of the bosses have interesting mechanics to do with random people. The Einhander with the bombs that he drops down, that if you don't knock him away can blow you up and do a lot of damage to you. The Magitech gunship that will lose its aggro table to do the big flame attack. And then Midgard Stormer himself, which kind of requires you to be on your toes the entire fight. You're dodging tons of AoEs. You're dealing with multiple enemies firing out different AoEs at you at the same time. And if you don't take out the Einhander that shows up in the middle of the fight to get the Magitech Terminal and activate it, you get wiped. Again, thematically, this dungeon's super cool. I love running this dungeon with people that I know or with a good group because it is such a fun idea. And then you have some really interesting fights. I really do like the boss fights in this. But at the same time, it's really annoying with random. I would probably put it in a low S. It's just such a cool idea, man. Finding the thanks. Finding the ghost basically of Midgard Stormer on the ship that he crashed into at the end of 1.0. It's super cool. Following up Keeper of the Lake is Wanderer's Palace Hard. I don't really like this dungeon. I don't hate it, but I don't think these boss fights are very fun at all. You're fighting a bunch of Mamul-Ja, which haven't really been... I mean, there are some Mamul-Ja in the area around Amdapur that you'll fight in the open world, but for the most part, Mamul-Ja have not really integrated in with the story at all, you know? And it's just kind of weird to suddenly be, alright, you fight some Mamul-Ja mercenaries that have settled in there, when you haven't really fought them in the story that much at all. And they're just like, they're set up, man. They got totems in there. They have mounts in there. It just feels really weird that all of a sudden they got a hold of Wanderer's Palace and they've completely set up in there and you're having to work through to get to them. And again, I just don't really like, especially the final fight against Mola Jaja. The two-headed Mamul-Ja is just it's not a very good fight, in my opinion. It's a really annoying fight with the sacred idols that he can throw down. Yeah, it's just, I don't like it at all. It's not a very good dungeon, in my opinion. Thematically, even, it doesn't really work, because why are there Mamul-Ja in Wanderer's Palace. I don't know. I guess the Mamul Jaw is a bigger sticking thing for me than I thought it would be when I was starting this ranking, but it just feels really weird that they're there. Amdapor Keep hard. I don't like this as much as I like regular Amdapor, for sure. But I do think it has some really cool boss fights. I think it has some really interesting pulls. The first pull catches you right away by, hey, you have to take out these roots. Or these vines, I guess. I take them out to be able to progress. Which normally, like, dungeons just let you go, right? So it's pretty cool to have that stop you right at the start. Ankag, I guess, is basically Odin. Like, it's basically that model. He doesn't have the same moves. His moves are pretty cool for the most part, but it's basically Odin's model, which is not a bad thing. Odin's got a pretty cool model. The second boss fight's really interesting, the Boogeyman, and he has this thing where he can turn invisible, and you have to run to him to reveal him, which is really cool, because you have to have the illuminating AoE explosion to knock him back, and I think it's a really interesting fight. It's not something you see anywhere else in the game, really. So definitely want to call that out. And the final boss fight, of course, against Ferdiad is really interesting. You have his scythe that he throws out, you know. Ferdiad is almost like a mix between the Edda fight and Diablo's fight. And of course, this is not the first or the only time that you'll fight Ferdiad if you run every instance in the game. But it's just kind of cool to fight Ferdiad here. You may not kill him here, because he does get away, but it's still a really interesting fight. You're also fighting him over, like, this giant death pit of, like, hell below you, basically, which looks really cool. You also have the fight against the demon walls as you fall down there, and you have the 4 walls around you, and it's a pretty cool set piece. I think all told, Amdapor Hard, still not as cool as, like, regular Amdapor to me, but I like it quite a bit. It's gonna go, like, top of A, right behind regular. Following Amdapor Keep Hard, we have our first Heavensward dungeon. We're getting there. We finished all of ARR's dungeons now. Our first Heavensward dungeon, Dusk Vigil. I like Dusk Vigil quite a bit. I think it's a kind of annoying dungeon to run over and over again because how long it is, it feels a lot longer than it is in a way because of how slow you have to take the pulls, because of the roving Avises. But at the same time, it has some really interesting boss fights. I think the Towering Oliphant is a really cool fight as you are trying to, you know, deal with its route charge and the stun that it does. I think that stun's called Rock of Ages. You also have Yhelmeric, which is a really interesting fight as, like, Chirurgeons pop up and can heal him, and then a bunch of soldiers pop up and can damage you, and you have to manage the AoE circles that he's putting out and that the other enemies are putting out while trying to take him down. It's not difficult per se, but it is pretty cool. And then Openicus is kind of a cool fight. You have the whirling gowl that he puts in the middle of the room that can suck you in. You have to get behind the rocks to avoid that. You have his free falls, and you want to try and make sure he doesn't hit the rocks so that you still have them for whirling gowl while also trying to do as much damage to him as you can. And I just think it's a really interesting fight. Dusk Vigil is one of those dungeons that when I started this list, I was like, it's not going to rank very highly. But now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm actually, like, considering it and looking at it thematically and how it's the first dungeon of Heavensward, and you're trying to, you know, you're trying to get into the story of what happened with Dusk Vigil, and you can actually get a lot of that story. There's notes all over the dungeon that if you stop and read them are really cool. I think that Dusk Vigil has to go in not Esk. S. Following that is Some All, which is a pretty cool dungeon. Some All has some interesting pulls. Nothing really that sticks out, but I like the pulls in Some All. I really like the bosses in Some All. Raskovnik is fine. You can kind of just wail on Raskovnik and not even really worry about the bees that it summons, the hornets. But Meath is super cool. I think Meath is a really interesting boss fight. It's basically like this giant T-Rex that will grab the flans that are around the room and will throw them at you. And it's just such a weird but cool idea as it bounces around and throws them at you. And you have to try and take him down. And then Teoman has some really cool mechanics. It has a comets that it can send down. It has a comets. Yeah, that's right, Trey. It has comets that it can send down that are targeted on players. It has Heaven's Fall, which is like a cluster of AoEs and is really cool. And then it also has this room-wide AoE, the raid-wide, and then at some point you have to take out its wings. It's just a really interesting fight, and it's kind of a step up boss fight design-wise from what you've had up to that point. I mean, there had been some really cool final boss fights, but mechanics-wise, there's a lot going on in the Teoman fight, but I don't ever feel like it's really overwhelming. I think for the most part, it's reasonable, but still a lot to remember, and it kind of sets the stage for a lot of the other boss fights, the final boss fights that are going to follow. We're going to put Salmal, I think we're going to put it at the top of A. It's a nifty dungeon, has some really good boss fights. Thematically, it's the home of the dragons, right? It's the Dragon Mountain as you climb the mountain. It may move up to S when we go to start ranking them in the tiers. We'll see. Following that is the Airy, which is a dungeon that I've probably ran almost as much as I've ran Praetorium at this point. There was a good 2 weeks that every single time I queued into leveling, I got the Airy. Without fail. And so I know the Airy pretty well. The random lightning bolts at the start of the dungeon that fall can be kind of annoying, but also fit thematically for where you are as you're getting ready to go fight Nidhogg himself, you know? The boss fights themselves are okay. It's kind of just a straight run. There's a couple small short paths that you can go on the sides to get stuff, but nothing really great there. Rangda, the first boss, has some interesting mechanics, having to tether him to a pillar so that he doesn't insta-kill the person that's got the tether is really cool. And then the ad that shows up there is not really that big of an annoyance. You just take it out. Other than that, Rangda's pretty easy. Just move in when he does the big raid wide. Diascutus is a really cool boss. I actually really like it. It is basically just a big drake that spits out poison gas, and then a bomb will show up to eat the gas, and you have to let it. You don't have to. I mean, I guess you could just put up with the gas on the map, but you want to let it eat a couple of stacks before you kill it so that it gets rid of those stacks. And you just keep letting it do that as it goes. He has a pretty decent moveset, and you're having to balance the stacks of another thing that's not you as the player while dealing with the boss. And I think that's a really cool boss. And then finally, Nidhogg, again, like we were just talking about with Teoman, Nidhogg has a ton of really interesting mechanics, and Sable Price is kind of annoying, especially if your allies don't help you. I have died more to Sable Price than I have probably any other mechanic in this game, because it traps you, and if your allies don't get you out of it before the cast bar is finished, you die. It kills you. Sable Weave is the name of that ability. And so you want to get out of there. You want your allies to help you and to free you. And sometimes they don't do that. But for the most part, it's a really cool fight, especially at about 30% roughly. He'll leave, and he summons in ads, and you have to protect Estinian. And I think it's really cool that mid-boss fight, you have to switch gears from kill all these enemies, kill this boss, to keep Estinian alive. And it leads to this great moment where Estinian, blocks Nidhogg's attack. And if you haven't kept him up with enough health, he dies. And you wipe. But if you have, he's able to completely deflect it. And then you finish off Nidhogg. And it's really, really cool. Thematically, it works really well. Boss fight-wise, it works really well. I hate this dungeon so much. But that's because I've ran it so many times, and I do recognize it's a very good dungeon. One of my favorite parts about it is when you're running through this big open area and pillars fall to block off your path. It just feels really cool. You have to run around the pillars that have just fallen to be able to keep going. So as much as I hate this dungeon, because of how many times I've ran it, I am going to give it an S, because I think it is a very well-designed dungeon. From there, we get the Vault, which I'm also going to give an S to. I'm going to be honest with you. I think the Vault if there was one dungeon that somebody said, hey, like, show me a 14 dungeon, I would probably show them the vault. I think the vault can be a little stale with enemy typings, right? There's not that many kinds of enemies in the vault, but the actual pulls themselves are really cool. The first couple pulls are really exciting with a lot of small health bar enemies, a lot of low HP enemies, is how most people would have said that you can burn through pretty quickly. Then you have your first boss fight against Adolfel, and he has some really cool mechanics. You get to see him transform. From there, you have some more reasonable pulls, including a long stretch where you can either fight them as they come out and deal with bombardments, or you can rush straight to the mage at the end, and everything else will follow in. You have to deal with some of the Colossuses. You have to deal with the chess pieces. Then you have the fight against Grenal, who has some really cool mechanics. I actually really like the dark spheres that he sets up, that if you get knocked into them, you get a debuff. And so you're trying to not touch those tears, while also trying to avoid his AoEs. Then you have more cool pulls that lead up to a summon that is my only real big bugbear about the dungeon, which is that you can't stop the summon. So, like, even if you do more damage than he has health, he'll stay at 1 so he can summon the ads. I think that definitely should not be that way. I think if you can kill him before he can finish summoning, then he just doesn't get to summon. Or maybe he summons less of them or something like that. But past that, you then have the fight against Charbet. And the fight against Charbet is a really, really good fight. Mechanics-wise, there's a lot going on again, but at this point, it feels like Square has really figured out how they want to do dungeon final bosses for 14, and they are just on it. It is such a good fight, as Charbet is constantly putting out these AoEs of fire on the ground. He's chaining people together. He's summoning in the chess pieces. He's got some really great lines that make the dungeon really memorable. Thematically, the dungeon means a lot to you because you're storming the Holy See, and you're gonna get the answers that you need. You just have to get through the Heaven's Ward to get there. And of course, the cutscene that follows is one of the most emotional cutscenes in the entire game. The vault, I'm gonna put it in triple S, man. I really am. I think it's worth it. Again, if I was to show somebody a dungeon in 14, the vault is probably what I would show them. I just think it's a really good dungeon. And speaking of really good dungeons, man, Goobal Library, the Great Goobal Library is such a good dungeon. It's thematically super cool as you're going into this ancient, kind of haunted library. You're dealing with all the stuff that's in there. You're fighting all these really interesting pulls, trying to stop books from summoning other enemies, trying to, make your way through these passageways, getting these bridges that are opening up as you go up, dealing with the different mobs there. And then you have fights against the Demon Tome, which is basically just a demon wall, but it's a book, so it can close and flip around, so you have to go on the other side of the arena. Then you have the Biblos, which is stuck in a book, and it's really cool, and you have to get the different spheres that pop up to hit him, to knock him out of the book so you can get to beating him again. And then you have the Bibliotaph at the end, which is a really cool fight, which has like this AoE set up on the ground that you have to have a specific number of people stand in. And I have died plenty of times there because people don't go where they're supposed to go. But it can be a really fun fight. I just think this is a really, really solid dungeon, and it looks super cool. It's thematically appropriate. What a dungeon, man. Goobal Library, triple S for sure. Following that is ARF. I think ARF is a really cool dungeon. I think it looks really cool. ARF is really long. The first boss fight is okay against Regula. It's cool to be fighting Regula too, but it's not like a great fight. And the pulls in between Regula and Harmachis are kind of annoying, as you have these spheres in the ground that you have to damage, and ads come running everywhere. And normally people don't focus the spheres or focus the ads. They kind of split attention between the two, and so you're not doing as much damage as you need to do, and the tank's kind of having to just stand in AoEs so that everything stays where it needs to for all the AoEs that your allies have put down. I don't think those pools are very cool. I think it's a nifty idea. I just don't like those pools at all. I do think Heart Machis is a cool fight as it shifts between the forums. You can, however, skip forums if you do enough damage, which is a cool thing, I guess, but it is a shame when you skip some of the cooler forums. And then that final boss fight is okay as you switch between La Habre and Igayorm. It is a harsh dichotomy between doing that fight and suddenly triggering the Prime cutscene when everybody in the party has cutscenes set to auto skip, because it's here we go. Here's the Prime. And I don't think the Prime fight's a problem or anything. I think it's fine. You take it out, you know. But it's just a weird dungeon. It's one of those dungeons that I forget about until I suddenly get it again, and then I go, oh yeah, this dungeon exists. So I think I'll probably put ARF in A. I think it's fine. It's really long. Actually, we might put it in the top of B because it feels like it goes on forever. Another dungeon that I forget about every time is Neverreap. Neverreap is fine. Like, it's a cool idea thematically, being up in the clouds, in the sea of clouds, you know, and on these floating islands and moving through. I think the boss fights are okay. The Nunyenuk is like whatever, you know, you gotta find the shadow to take it out. I think that's a cool mechanic. Having to run around in the mist. I think there's another boss in this ranking that does that mechanic better. Kanuvanu is okay, as you have to deal with the Moro clouds and the totems. And then the Wakion is a cool idea, with the turbine and everything. It's just, this dungeon, it's very forgettable in a really bad way. I hate that it's so forgettable, because I do think it's an interesting idea, right? It doesn't really work for me. I'm gonna put it in B. I like it more than ARF. Following that is Fractal Continuum. I think the dungeon itself is really cool. I wish I could say the same for the bosses. The first boss, the Phantom Ray, is basically just Ravana's sprite. Like, it is his model, but not as cool as Ravana. He has some nifty mechanics, but he's like nowhere near as cool as Ravana, right? The second boss fight against the Minotaur is just another Minotaur enemy that has the same like swings and swipes. The final fight against the Curator is really cool. It has some really nifty ideas, like the Therochemical Explosive. It can be really difficult to deal with if your healers are not on top of it with those explosives, because they do quite a bit of damage, and the healer needs to heal you to get rid of it. But I think it's a really cool fight. The dungeon's really cool. I just think the first two fights are really boring compared to that. So we're going to go ahead and put it in B as well. St. Machines Arboretum. This is a nifty dungeon. We don't get a lot of good plant-based dungeons in this game. Like, Aurum Vale was the last plant-based dungeon, really. So I think it's a really cool idea going into a plant-based dungeon with a bunch of stuff there. The boss fights are okay. Queen Hawk is kind of annoying because of the bees. But for the most part, the bosses are fine. I think the Belladonna fight is pretty cool. I much prefer the hard version of St. Machines Arboretum. We'll get there in a little bit. But yeah, I think this dungeon's fine. Put it in B. Following that is Pharos Hard. Oh man, I hate this fight. And by fight, I mean the final fight. I don't know what it is about Pharos Hard and like the bomb fight at the end that just rubs me the wrong way. The rest of the fights are okay. It's just Pharos again, but now it's been taken over by the kobolds, basically. And like, it kind of has the same problem that I have with Amdapor Hard, which is why the kobolds have taken over the Pharos Sirius Lighthouse. I don't know. There is lore for it, right? Just like the Mamul Ja being set up there. But it just feels weird for, hey, this is a place that we know people could be going most of the time. Why has it been taken over? And I just don't like any of the fights, really. The fight against Bigu is not that great. The Gra Luminary is not that great. I think the Luminary is probably the best fight of the three, but I hate the fight against Progenitrix and Progenitor. So, Pharos Sirius Hard. Sorry, you're going in C. Put you right here. Antti Tower, however, is another one of those top tier dungeons for me. a lot of it for me is spectacle. Like, if I'm gonna have to run a dungeon a lot, I want it to be thematically really cool. But I also really enjoy good boss fights. And I think the Antti Tower has good boss fights as well. It also has some great spectacle to it, but we'll get to that. I think the Zoro Rogo fight is really cool. As he's, sending out debuffs that have to be dispelled, and you have the ads popping up. The Ziggy fight is really cool with the different Stardust that he's doing, and you have to deal with that. And the Calcabrina fight is great. It's one of my favorite fights in the game, as they can turn other players into dolls. And if those other players are the tank and the healer, DPS is in trouble. You have to be on top of your game to survive that. It can be really annoying if it's tank and healer multiple times, but as long as you get good RNG, it's a really fun fight. Other than that, its other abilities are really cool as well. The fighting the six and then them forming together, I just think it's a really cool fight. Then you have how much of a spectacle Antti Tower is. Thematically, how cool it is as you're going upside down, You're going up the upside down staircase, basically. I just think it's a really cool dungeon, and it's definitely going in S tier. It may wind up moving up to triple S tier. We're getting there. We're getting there. Following Antti Tower is Lost City of Amdapor Hard. Amdapor Hard is also really cool. I don't think it's quite as cool as regular Lost City, but I do think it's nifty. I think the Akka Moth is a cool fight. I think the Winged Lion is a really cool fight, and I think the Karibu is nifty, especially knowing what we know now about the Winged Lion and the Karibu, that they're basically Sin Eaters. The Winged Lion has a bunch of white magic abilities that it can use. The Karibu can regen itself, though you can interrupt that, so you should probably interrupt that every time you can. It also has the decoy ability where it can summon another Karibu that you have to deal with. It can heal itself, and so you have to step into the circles to remove one of the spikes so that it heals itself for less. I just think it's a really nifty fight. And then you have the fact that it is still Amdapor, but now it's Amdapor, which was already a beautiful zone dungeon with a darker filter on there almost. I think it's just a really cool dungeon. It's definitely going in S tier. Sor Kai. So I could talk to you about how great the other boss fights are, the Chieftain Moglin that you have to deal with, and how, hey, you get to beat up some Moogles. That's pretty cool, right? Maybe you're a person who doesn't like Moogles. Maybe you're a person who does like Moogles. These Moogles want to hurt you. You got to fight back. I think the second fight against Pogiraj is pretty cool. Can be very difficult to figure out. Took me quite a few tries to finally get a handle on, but it's a pretty cool fight with the ability to fly in and, knocks you into the sides. You can accidentally destroy that, and then you get knocked into the stun. But that final fight against Freysfelger, man, as Freysfelger is able to just fly across the arena and you have to jump from platform to platform to platform, I just realized that the green screen has fallen down and probably been like that for about an hour. Now the green screen's fixed. That's what I get for not looking. That final fight against Freysfelger, as you jump between platform to platform to platform to platform, trying to take him out, dealing with everything he has going on, the dragon heads flying around, the ice cubes, over this beautiful golden, vast, dearth of sky, as you are just bouncing. It's so cool. Definitely triple S, man. The rest of the dungeon's really cool too, don't get me wrong. But for that final fight alone, it has to go in triple. Following that is Hullbreaker Hard. I think Hullbreaker Hard is a really cool dungeon. It has some cool fights. I think the fight against the, Sanguine Sirens, you have to deal with all of the different stuff that pops up there, is really cool. The pulls themselves aren't that interesting. They're just kind of there. Fight against Ymir is okay. It's, sure, whatever. You'll fight another Ymir in another dungeon. But the fight against Grand Storm Marshal Slafishrin is a really good fight, especially once he puts on the Mistbeard mask, and then you're dealing with the Fire Sand kegs. That is just a really cool fight, and I think it really does help the dungeon quite a bit, because otherwise it's kind of just more Hullbreaker, which is not a bad thing. I really like Hullbreaker, but it's that final fight with Slafsrin that really sells it. We're going to put it in A. Following that is Zelphatal. Zelphatal is a really weird dungeon for me because it's one that I ran a bunch of times, but I never really got like annoyed at running it as many times as I did. I don't like running Zelphatal, but I think Zelphatal thematically is really cool, and it lets us explore an area of the world that we hadn't been able to explore yet. A couple other dungeons on this list that are just like that. I think the boss fights are okay. Having to deal with the air stones with Nuzal is okay. Dotali with his pushing you out into the spikes is pretty interesting. Even if that same spike pit is basically the one from Alexander Raids. And then Tozal Huatotl, that's it. And his ability to summon Garuda is pretty crazy. It's just a fun dungeon. Like, it's not the greatest dungeon on this list for sure, but it's just a fun dungeon. We're going to put it in A. Following that is Gooble Hard. Gooble Hard is Gooble, but with different boss fights. And the boss fights are pretty good. Liquid Flame is not bad at all. It's, again, very much like an Alexander fight. But Strix is very different, and I think Strix alone, plus you're going back to Google, makes it really good. If it had a couple more additions to it, I think maybe it could have gone above even regular Google, but I still like regular Google more. Although I do like Strix as a fight more than I like the Bibliophogus. Baelsar's Wall is next, and Baelsar's Wall, it's a dungeon that I ran many, many times to get the Summoner gear, and the first two bosses are just kind of more of the same, you know? The Magitech Predator and the Armored Weapon. I think the Armored Weapon is cooler than the Magitech Predator, for sure. The Magitech Predator has a cool, like, missile attack that can be really annoying to deal with, and it can cause in these other attackers that will target specific party members, and that's kind of cool. I think the Armored Weapon, with its, like, ability to pause the entire battlefield, basically, by, if you are attacking, when it uses Dynamic Sensory Jammer, you will get hit, and so you want to not attack during that, and I think that's kind of cool that it makes you pause. It's a lot better to me than an actual, you know, oh, the boss is just invincible now. However, the Griffon Fight is really good. Thematically, it means a lot to you with everything going on in the story at the time. This guy has been a huge thorn in your side this entire time. And then the actual fight itself is really cool. He's got a lockdown in the form of the restraint collar. He has the big lion's head move where swords come down from the sky. He's very memorable. Baelsar's is just a really cool dungeon. It's not top of the line at all, but I think it definitely belongs in S tier. And then we have Samal Hard, which I actually do like more than regular Samal, which is weird. Normally the hard mode versions I don't. But Samal Hard has the Leighton Ward, which is a decent fight against a thing that looks like Bulbasaur grew up and didn't evolve, but just became weird. I think the Leighton Ward fight's pretty cool as he, you know, fills the area with spores. Gaurau is just Devil Joe. That's great. Gaurau is really cool. He also does not really have a aggro table. So you kind of have to learn him. You have to figure him out. You have to watch his moves. And then the Lava Scorpion at the end has maybe one of my favorite mechanics in the game that I always see people not interact with, which is that he will drill into the ground, and he has ads that will drill into the ground, and if you don't stop them, they will drill into the ground and bring lava up through the ground because you're fighting over the lava, which is why he's a Lava Scorpion. I just think it's a really cool dungeon. Thematically, it looks really cool as you're delving back into Samal, going back down when before you were going up, down into the depths of Samal. I just think it's a really cool dungeon. We're going to put it in above regular Samal in an A. Now we're in the Stormblood dungeons. We're getting there. Let's tackle Siren Song C. Siren Song C is another dungeon, kind of like Zophatal, that I've ran many, many times, that even all those runs have not ruined it for me. I still really enjoy Siren Song. I think it is a very interesting dungeon, thematic wise, just looking at it, design wise. As you come off this boat into this haunted island, basically, and the bosses themselves are pretty cool. Lugat's okay. It's probably my least favorite of the three bosses. It's just kind of this sea monster thing that does water attacks. But the second boss, the governor, is this cool shadow creature that has all these cool different shadow attacks. It can make copies of itself and they march out. And then Lorelei is really cool. She puts down the tears, and then she has Morbid Advance or Morbid Retreat, and depending on which one she's casting, you need to make sure that you're standing in a spot so you don't run into them. The dungeon is littered with cool ghost type enemies that are hanging out and doing stuff, and you gotta take them out with mummies and spirits and will-o'-the-wisps, and it's just a really cool looking dungeon. I like it quite a bit. I'm gonna have to put it in S. I might really think about moving it up to SS, but we're gonna put it in S. Shisui of the Violet Tides. So, I haven't put a lot of stock into thematics for a boss fight other than Sorkai, right? Or for a dungeon. For thematics alone, I think Shisui of the Violet Tides has to go in Triple S. You are fighting through what's basically like Ryugu Kingdom, deep under the water, inside a bubble, the kingdom of a princess that has been overtaken, and you were fighting through fish, and you were fighting through snakes and sea serpents, and you were fighting through people that have become disillusioned and have become seduced by the fake ruby princess that you have to fight as well, who can seduce you, and you have to get into these coffers and open them up for a dust that turns you into an old woman so that you don't get seduced, so that you can beat her up. And it's just a really cool dungeon. I think the first boss is probably the most forgettable of it all, but it's still a fun fight for the most part. It's basically just the tail screw scorpion fish crab thing from Sastasha Hard, but now he can stand up and you have to take out his legs when he does. The Ruby Princess, again, I think is really cool. And then the final fight against Shisui Yohi is pretty interesting, because she is like Ursula almost from Little Mermaid and will disappear into this big drop sea debuff hurting wave where you have to take out these thick fog is what it's called. I don't know why I didn't just use the name. I'm getting tired. It's been almost 2 hours. It's been over 2 hours. These bubbles that you have to take out. And over time, she will also summon in sharks to back her up to try and do running AoEs at you that you have to take out before they hit other party members. It's just a really fun fight. I really like that fight, even though I've run it many, many times. Following that is Barnum's Medal. Barnum's is cool. Barnum's has one of the most unique dungeon boss fights in the entire game. The first boss fight is fine. The Galura, it just is a big beast that, other beasts will come in to back it up. But the second boss fight against Barnum himself is really cool. It's basically a mechanics fight. You don't actually do any damage in it. You have to ace all the mechanics, and if the entire party fails the mechanics, you fail. There have been runs where only one member of the party has done the mechanic, and we have succeeded because of that. But it's just really cool to focus on the mechanics for a boss fight. I wish they had done this in a dungeon way earlier, but I do really like it still. I think it's really cool. The final fight against the Yol is fine. I don't really like that fight, but I can do it. It's not a huge problem. I just don't really like it. I think it's a cool idea thematically, because your goal there is to get a Yol, and so you beat the Yol and then you claim it, But at the same time, that fight is really annoying with randoms and with new players. But once people have it down, it can be really easy. I think thematically the dungeon's really cool too, as you start off in this big open area. And yes, you're going down a straight track, but there's not many dungeons in this game that are outside. And especially that aren't outside going into a cave. You do eventually drop into a cave system, but the first good chunk of this dungeon is running around that plane, which I think is really cool. So we're going to put Barnum's in S. You may notice there's more dungeons that I like in this game than dungeons that I dislike. Following that is Doma Castle. I think Doma Castle is pretty cool. I like it. I don't like running it. Probably because I've run it too many times now. And unlike, say, Shisui or Barnum's, it definitely begins to grate on me over time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the bosses. Because again, you're fighting a Magitech Rearguard and a Magitech Hexadrone. And although they do have different boss fights from like basic Colossuses, it does get really old when you fight enemy types that you fought before as bosses. The final fight against Grenawat is way better. We go together after all. And I think that fight is really cool. I don't really like any of the trash pulls in this dungeon for the regular pulls. I think they're fine, but I just don't really like any of them. There's not really any cool mix-ups with them. It's just, hey, yeah, go take them out. Go do it. Kill them all. Here's you just fought a Hexadrone boss. Here's some smaller Hexadrones. Hey, here's spiders. Magitech spiders. Take them out. And it's just like, okay, yeah, we'll kill them all. We'll get to Grenawat, and then we'll have a good time. So for me, Doma is just a beat. Sorry, Doma. Castrum Meridian, however, is a very different story. Castrum Meridian, it feels like it takes forever to get through Castrum Meridian, but the boss fights in Castrum Meridian are pretty cool. I think the Magna Rotor is pretty interesting. You don't really fight Rotor enemies that often. In fact, I think this might be the first time. There's a couple more that pop up later, but I think this is the first time you fight one. You also have number 24, which is a pretty interesting fight in and of itself. It's a fight that I mess up a lot because it has these 3 puddles, and you have to move into the different puddles to get different elemental affinities, depending on what it has covered itself in. However, it's still a really cool fight. I think it has some really nifty mechanics. And it's very punishing if you get the wrong one. And then Inferno is a pretty cool fight. It's still, kind of Magitech, but it's not a Magitech creature in and of itself. It's going to get powered up by Magitech. So I think it's a little bit more forgivable with just how much Magitech bosses there are in the game. Because he's going back and he's getting recharged so that he can come back out and get you again. And you can take out the Deathclaws that are bringing more canisters and make it where he doesn't recharge. But his Tank Buster, the Ketu Slash, really hurts if you don't. Keep that in mind. I think I'd probably put Abania... Probably put it in a low A. I might move that up. Following that is Alamigo. Alamigo is a pretty fun dungeon. It is also very long, it feels like, as you go through these long different passages and have to fight a bunch of ads. The first boss is a Magitech Scorpion again, which is fine. It's a cool fight. But the second boss and third boss are what really sell Alamigo for me. Aulus Mal Asina literally takes your soul out of your body, and you have to get back in your body to be able to defeat him. And if you get grabbed by the claws, too bad, so sad, you're going to be slowed down. You may not get back in your body. And then once you get back to playing, you take out the claws, you save everybody, it's great. But it's just a really interesting idea for a fight where, hey, everything's going great, oh no, my soul is out of my body and this thing's coming for me. I just think it's really cool. And then the fight against Xenos is really nifty as well. I like that fight against Xenos a lot. As you have to deal with his various different abilities. He's got quite a few of them, but they don't really feel overwhelming because most of them are going to hurt you a lot if they hit you. So your goal is just not to be hit by them. And then, of course, he has his big enrage phase, but you just take him out. It's fine. It's a cool fight. I think I'd probably put Alamigo in an A as well. Following Alamigo, we have Kugane Castle. I think Kugane is a pretty cool dungeon. It's not... I don't like it as much as I like Alamigo or Doma, but I think it is a nifty challenge. You fight some enemies there you don't really fight anywhere else dungeon-wise in the game, so that's always good. The bosses are just kind of okay. Dojin Maru's okay. Zuiko Maru's okay. The final fight against Yojimbo, though, is really cool. Especially since you don't actually fight Yojimbo himself. Like, you're hurting him, but you're mainly trying to keep him from getting gold. And once he's out of gold, that's pretty much it. I think that's a really cool idea of, hey, instead of focusing on trying to beat the boss, let's beat him to the gold. Let's stop him from getting what he wants. And I just think that's really cool. I'm going to put it in an high B. Following Kugane, we have Temple of the Fist. Temple of the Fist is interesting. I think the final fight against Ivan Curlfist is a really good fight. I don't really like any of the other fights up until then. And I don't really like the actual dungeon itself. If that makes sense. I think it's just fine. It's just not very compelling to me. Thematically, it's supposed to be, the ruins of the old Temple of the Monks, but it's just not that cool, I guess. I feel like it could have been a lot cooler, and it feels like they tried to have this as a temple for the monks to train, but also here's this clifftop running with, these AoE lines popping up, and it's okay, sure, all right. I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. Let me know in the comments if it absolutely worked for you and I'm insane. But I'm going to put it in a B. I do like it more than Kugane, though. Following that is the drowned city of Scala, which I absolutely love. I think the fight against the Kelpie is a really cool fight. The first time that I was fighting it, I thought it lied to me, and that upset me, because I thought it said push when it said pull. But I do think the Kelpie's a really cool fight. I think the fight against the old one is really cool. And then the fight against Frodrick is pretty nifty as well. I think the actual design of Scala, as you are going down into the city that has been completely drowned, as the name suggests, as it has been, completely flooded, is really interesting. There's some other really cool places in the lore that have been overwhelmed by an element as well, and I'd like to go there. I think, again, it has that thing that Zelphatol did, where it lets me go somewhere I already wanted to go, So I think that's really cool. I'm going to put it in an A. Hell's Lid. I don't really like this dungeon. I think it does the job. I really like the idea of the enemies you're fighting are the other vestiges. Serve alongside Genbu, the Otakemaru, the Kamataichi, and Genbu himself. I think the fights with the bosses are pretty good. The Genbu fight is really good. I really like that fight. But the rest of the dungeon is just kind of more we're inside another volcano, and we've done that quite a few times already between raids and dungeons. So it's just like, okay. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I would much rather run it than Aurum Vale. But, I'm at this point now with dungeons where I want them to... They can't all do something new, right? That'd be ridiculous to ask every dungeon to do something new. But I want them all to at least be thematically different. And Hell's Lid is, you're going into a volcano and then you're, coming out into a really cool ruined underground city surrounded by ancient water. But we just did that with the drowned city of Scala. And we just did that not that long ago with a couple other dungeons, And so it's like, yeah. But at the same time, it's just, I prefer it to a lot of these other dungeons. Still going to put it in A. But there are just other dungeons that I like a lot more. Following that is Fractal Hard, which I actually like a lot more than I like regular Fractal. I think Fractal Hard is really cool because when you spawn in, a bunch of the enemies that you fought the first time are just dead on the ground. And I think that's really cool to start out that way, to be like, look out. Something has broke free and it's tougher than all this stuff that you were able to beat before, The boss fights I don't think are too great. Like they're fine. Nothing really that stands out, that I want to call out. The Mother Bit is a cool idea. Fighting Allegan Tech. And I do think the Ultima Warrior being able to, take on some other aspects of like If Servant, If Sophia, is pretty cool. Ultima Beast isn't bad. It's more of, again, a type of enemy we've seen before. It's basically Behemoth, but it has some cool moves. It's not bad at all. I think Fractal Hard's fine. It did the job. We'll put it behind Hell's Lid. I would still rather do Fractal Hard than I would do Fractal Normal. Swallow's Compass is a really interesting dungeon, mostly because the start is this square, and you have to work your way around it, as compared to just, oh, here's a door, let's go through it. You have to actually unlock that door by doing the elemental rooms around it. The boss fights are fine. Again, they're not anything super crazy except for the final one, which is basically a fight against Sun Wukong. That's a really fun fight. I like that fight quite a bit, actually. Swallow's Compass would probably be a high A. We'll go within the tiers after we're done. I'd definitely give it a high A, I believe. St. Machines Arboretum Hard. I really like this dungeon. I think that the regular pulls as you're going across the water on top of the lily pads are really cool. I think Nolchu as the first boss is pretty interesting. I mean, yes, it's just another Ochu fight, but it does have some newer mechanics to it that make it pretty nice. I think the big one would be Taproot, which is where everybody gets an AoE and you have to spread out. None of the other Ochus have really done that before, so that's okay. Lakamu is a pretty cool fight. I like it well enough. And then the final fight against Tokapchi, where you're fighting a poop monster. It's a pretty good fight. I mess it up a lot, but I actually think it's really cool how the arena itself is these grates and then these series of circles on the floor, and you have to stand on the circles when the mud flies up from below so that you don't take a bunch of damage from it. I actually really like this fight. I think it's a lot of fun. So I would probably put St. Machines Arboretum, I'd probably put it in a high A as well. And I ordered them wrong again, according to the actual list that I made here. But the Burn thematically is a really cool dungeon, as you were out in the Burn itself, the area that has been completely bled dry of ether. You have some really interesting bosses. Hedatet, pretty cool. The Defective Drone, pretty cool. And the Mist Dragon fight is really good. I love that fight where the Mist Dragon will, disappear into the mist, and then you have to run around the arena and try to get away from where it's going to pop out. Try to do enough damage as you can. And of course, if you attack it while it is vaporized, you're going to take a bunch of damage. Because you're going to get frozen, and then you're going to take damage when it pops back out. Yeah, I really like this fight. I think running through this dungeon surrounded by all this white sand and the stuff that has been, killed in it, I think it's really cool. I'm going to give it a S for sure. And then finally, for the Stormblood dungeons, we have the Gimlet Dark. I think this is a pretty good dungeon. It's mostly a story dungeon. You're not really going to have a lot of trouble with the fights. You're going to fight another Magitech Colossus. Oh boy, I'm sick of fighting those guys. The Prometheus fight is actually pretty good. It's basically a Magna Rotor on steroids with a drill that can drill into a mountain and drill up out of the ground. It's a pretty nifty fight. And then the fight against the Serratus sisters is pretty good. The high five that they do in the middle of the fight is really cool. I think that is thematically really nifty. And getting to see the NPCs that you love so much doing limit breaks is really cool. And depending on, it rolls randomly when you get in there, which NPC is going to be the one that does the limit break. I think that's really nifty. So, I do like Gimlet Dark quite a bit. Other than having to fight those Colossuses again. So sick and tired of fighting Colossus. I'm going to give it an S. Then we get into the Shadowbringers dungeon. And we have only a handful of them so far, but most of them are really solid. There's only, I think, one that I'm not a huge fan of. For the most part, I love all of these dungeons. So, we'll start off with, and you can't see it behind my chair. Oh, we'll start off with Holminster Switch. Holminster it feels longer than it is in a lot of ways because of how slow the first couple pulls are and how slow the last couple pulls are because you have to stop and take out the Sin Eaters before you can move forward. But Holminster is still a really solid dungeon in my opinion. Getting to see Sin Eaters turning other things into Sin Eaters before your eyes, knowing that the Sin Eaters you're fighting, a lot of them are the citizens of Holminster Switch itself, of the town of Holminster. Fighting against Tesleen Fighting against Tesleen is hard, man, because that fight's rough. Poor Tesleen, man. And then the actual fight against Philia at the end is really good. As Philia has the left and right knots and does the spin attack and has the ability to lock you down and your party has to get you out of there, you know. It's just a really solid dungeon, and since you can bring trust into these dungeons, if you bring Alice with you, she will have dialogue to say about it. Well, it's a really good dungeon. I like it quite a bit. It definitely set the stage for Shadowbringers. I'm going to give it a S. And it may wind up being a high S. But it's a really solid dungeon for sure. Holminster Switch. Following that is Don Meg. Don Meg is a really fun dungeon. I like it quite a bit. The boss fights are really solid. I think that the final boss fight is really good, as you have to cross that divide to be able to get over there to fight Ankhthon. I think that it's a beautiful dungeon thematically. I really like Don Meg. It's not perfect, for sure, but it's a really solid dungeon. I'm going to put it in S as well. The Kitana Ravel. The Kitana Ravel is great. This is one of my favorite dungeons in the game already. The music's great. I think the actual, like, theme of the dungeon as you're running through the ancient Ronkin civilization and you have to fight against these really interesting bosses with Lozadal and then the Bat Squatch that, especially if you're playing a tank, you have to really be careful with your defensive cooldowns with the Bat Squatch. He can do a surprising amount of damage. The Light Warden Eros, who has all these different moves and will poison you and has the big dash. It's a really cool dungeon. My only real complaint with it are the gorillas towards the end, where you have to take out everything else and then they come in. It would be nice if you just grab them as well while you're doing the pulls. But other than that, I actually really like the Kitana Ravel. It's going triple S tier for me. Following that is Malika's Well. Malika's Well is pretty good. Of the Shadowbringers dungeons, it's probably my least favorite. I really like the final battle against Storage. I think that fight's really fun, as you have to deal with his crystal nails that he throws down. But I really don't like the fight against the Armadillo or the Talos. I wish that there were different fights there. I'll be honest, I think the idea of the Talos is really cool. And it can be fun fighting him if you have a party that, you know, picks up on the spin attack that he has early on. But for the most part, it just does so much damage to people that aren't paying attention. And the Armadillo, it's just not a really fun fight to me. I think it's a cool idea, but it just didn't really work for me. Besides that, Malika's Well is... I mean, put it in perspective, right? Holminster Switch, we're running through a ruined town as it's falling apart. Don Meg is a dungeon unlike anything we'd ever had before. The Kitana Ravel is yet again running into an old civilization, but in a brand new way with different architecture and different bosses. And then we're going back down into caverns. And yes, at the bottom of the caverns is a really cool, like, crystal formation down there to the boss fight. But up until that point, we're going into another mine. And we've done that quite a few times already. So I guess it just didn't really work for me in the way that I wanted it to. It's still a dungeon that I would prefer over any of the B rank dungeons that we have here. And it'll probably wind up pretty high in A rank, but just couldn't go higher than that for me. Mount Gulg is a really cool dungeon. As you're going through the dungeon, the giant Talos that you have built is backing you up. The bosses are pretty good, and as you come down to the Consort of Sin, that fight is really solid. I think getting to the transition where it goes from Mount Gulg to Vothri's Fortress is really cool. It's a huge spectacle the whole time. It's not a very difficult dungeon. Most of the bosses don't even really have any crazy mechanics. The Forgiven Whimsy, where you're fighting an actual, like, set of animated squares, is really cool. But for the most part, the bosses are just fine. I think it's just a really cool spectacle dungeon. I'm going to go ahead and put it in S, though, because I would rather do Mount Gulg than I would a lot of these other ones. So, Amalrot is my new favorite dungeon in the game. Only maybe challenged by the next one we're going to talk about. Spoilers. Amalrot thematically is great. As you are running through a civilization that is in the process of falling apart as everything is exploding, narrated by Emmett Selk. Then you have the first beast, which is ridiculous amount of mechanics going on. Really, really cool fight, though, despite all that. You have the Terminus Bellwether, which is my least favorite boss of the three. It's just an ad fight, but sure, you take it out, it's fine. And then you fight Therion, the Chthonic Riddle. And this is a fight that's very difficult. You can lose it very quickly, but it's a lot of fun. It's a really cool fight. As you fight him in space, it is just a really, really, really cool boss fight. And of any dungeon on this list, it should be one that I hate because of how many times I've got it, how many times I've failed it. I don't fail dungeons often, but there are times where I'll get with a party that just cannot clear. There was one party that I got with that we cleared in the last 5 minutes because it just, people sometimes really struggle with mechanics, okay? It happens. No matter how often you try to tell them, stand on this spot that I'm standing right now and you'll be okay. But despite that, Amalrot is an amazing dungeon. Thematically, it has great music, it has great boss fights, it has really interesting mob pools. There are mobs in the pools that target the first person they see. So that's not always going to be the tank. Sometimes that's a healer, sometimes that's DPS, and you have to burst them down first. I just think it's a really, really great dungeon, and I'm so glad it's in the game. And speaking of really, really great dungeons, the Twinning, the other dungeon that might be my favorite dungeon, and fights with Amalrot for my favorite dungeon. The Twinning has a great soundtrack. Thematically, is super cool, as it's inside the Crystal Tower in the future. It has some great boss fights between the Alpha Zagnai, Mithridates, which is honestly just a boss fight from Final Fantasy 13, but is really well done here. And then the Tycoon itself that uses abilities from Omega, that uses abilities from Alexander. It's such a cool fight, wrapped in with this entire interesting dungeon that has a great killer soundtrack the whole time. Absolutely love the Twinning. Such a good dungeon. And then we'll round all this out. Academia Anadir. And it's going to be another Triple S. Some people will look at this and say, this is recency bias. I will tell you, it's entirely possible. But I really do like these dungeons. I think that first fight against the two sharks, Cladosalesh and Dolodios, is really cool, as each of them have different moves, and you have to memorize which color does which move, as you have to balance that out over the course of the fight. The Marquis Borbol is really cool, as it has the same slam down vine effects that one of the bosses in the Big City raids has, while you are also having to deal with everything else that it can do. And then the fight against Quetzalcoatl, it's such a cool fight because the actual orbs around can give you a damage up buff. And so you are trying to collect the orbs while also trying not to get hit, while also trying to dodge the bad while running back to the boss after it's pushed you away. It's such a cool fight. The whole time you are learning more about La Habrea and Selk and some of the other Asians. It's such a cool dungeon. I absolutely love it. It has a really cool like pop jazz style soundtrack. Top tier dungeon. That's everything on our list. So now we get to rank them inside their tiers. Man, okay. Amalrot, still going to be the top. We're going to leave the Twinning there. We're probably going to put the Vault above Anadir. I'm sorry, but we'll leave Anadir there. We're going to move the Katana Ravel up. We might, we'll leave it right here. Gubal is going to go up. I really like Gubal. I think this is pretty good. I still think Hawk needs to be that high because of what it does for new players, as well as being a thematically really cool dungeon. And I still think Amdapor needs to be that high. Lost City of Amdapor. Lost City's really good. Tamtara hard, yes. Sorkai, Shisui, and our S tier. Sastashi's probably high compared to some of these other dungeons. Even though I think it does a really good job of telling players what they need to do. We'll probably move. Actually, really like a lot of this placement right now. I think we can move Brayflux hard down and Halatali hard down. Gubal hard still needs to be up. I think Gubal hard could probably be right here, and then Antti Tower right behind it, and maybe Dawn Meg. Keep it the Lake and Hullbreaker. We'll move Sastasha behind those. And the Airy, Snow Cloak, no. Snow Vigil. Dusk Vigil, yes. I think this is pretty good right here. I might move Siren Song back and move Barnum's up. Yeah, this looks good. Then an A tier. We'll move Sastasha hard down. It doesn't really do that much for us. And then regular Halatali can move down too. Move Hullbreaker hard down too. I mean, it's cool, but this seems reasonable. Move, yeah, Abania up about here. But yeah, that seems good. And then in B tier, we kind of were shifting B tier around while we were doing it. But I think Never Reap should probably be higher. That's a fine dungeon. It just, yeah, it seems good. And then C tier, Aurum Vale is in no, so it's fine. Yeah, this seems good to me. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts. I'm sure a lot of people won't agree with this and will like other dungeons more. But until next time, I've been Trey. This has been the Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Final Fantasy XIV has to offer.